Wealthy surgeon's son tried to joke in court. Judge Caprio instantly ended his laughter. The morning sun glinted off the black luxury SUV as it rolled to a stop at 8:58 a.m., Thursday, June 6, 2024, on Park Avenue. Ryan Whitman stepped out, his designer blazer catching the light, the tailored cut hugging a posture that radiated certainty, bordering on cockiness. Two legal aides flanked him, papers rustling in their hands, while his father's assistant adjusted a cufflink, nodding toward the courthouse steps with an almost ceremonial reverence. Ryan's smirk was effortless, a quiet proclamation that the world owed him indulgence, and in that brief moment, the street felt smaller beneath his swagger. He glanced up at the courthouse, tossed a casual remark about potential delays, and laughed, a sound that drew subtle glances from pedestrians and the small press contingent gathered just behind the ropes. Inside, Judge Caprio, 63, had already taken his seat, his eyes calm but precise, measuring the rhythm of the morning, the stir of privilege entering his domain. The judge's gaze settled on Ryan with an unshakable composure. Without raising his voice, he said, "In this courtroom, your father's reputation does not excuse your conduct." The words landed like stones in water. The gallery stiffened. Reporters scribbled furiously, the hum of anticipation crackling in the air. For a heartbeat, Ryan's grin faltered, a flicker of uncertainty passing behind confident eyes, almost imperceptible, but real enough for those watching closely. Ryan's family shifted, subtle gestures betraying their tension. His mother's fingers twitched at her lap, a faint lip bite betraying unease, while his father's jaw tightened, the veneer of control cracking ever so slightly. The legal aides whispered hurried reminders of influence, precedence, and expectation, but the courtroom's atmosphere rendered these gestures nearly impotent. In that moment, the balance of power, carefully curated through wealth and status, collided with a judicial authority that demanded nothing less than equality under the law. The smirk returned on Ryan's face, tighter now, as if willing it back into permanence. "So dramatic," he murmured under his breath, audible only to himself, a quiet assertion that privilege could still color reality. But the courtroom held its breath, as though sensing the fragility beneath the bravado. Reporters exchanged glances. Staff leaned forward slightly, sensing the tension ripple outward. Ryan's eyes scanned the room, noting the subtle judgments. The clerk's raised eyebrow, the gallery's whispered observations, the silent acknowledgement that this was more than a procedural morning. It was the first test of what his entitlement could withstand. The courthouse itself, marble and solemnity, seemed to absorb the arrogance like a sponge, reflecting it back in the formality of law. For a moment, time suspended, the weight of expectations, the invisible shields of privilege, and the reality of accountability hovered in equilibrium. Judge Caprio's quiet authority imposed a gravity that words alone could not, an unspoken challenge. Here, no amount of inherited prestige could exempt a person from the responsibilities that accompany action. Ryan's grin wavered, and for a brief, telling instant, the carefully constructed aura of invincibility felt porous. He stepped forward, blazer brushing against his side, the movement confident but now edged with subtle hesitation. The murmurs of the press and the soft shuffle of legal aides filled the silent gaps, an audible tension threading through the room. "Ready to start this?" one aide whispered, though no answer came immediately. Ryan's glance met his father's, and in that shared look was a microcosm of generational expectation, entitlement, and the untested boundary of law confronting influence. Judge Caprio's eyes met Ryan's again. There was no sarcasm, no theatrics, just a calm, unwavering assertion of principle. "Your conduct will be measured by the consequences it creates, not by the name you carry," the judge said, and the room absorbed it. Collective breath held as a fragile challenge met immutable authority. For Ryan, the moment was brief but seismic. His smirk flickered one last time, almost imperceptibly, a hint that the veneer might not be enough. The gallery sensed it. Reporters paused, pens hovering. The collision between wealth-fueled arrogance and judicial impartiality had begun, and the stage was set for every tension, confrontation, and moral reckoning that would follow. The morning air outside seemed lighter now, But inside, the first fissures in entitlement were quietly forming. The battle between inherited power and earned accountability was about to unfold, and Ryan Whitman, with all his confidence and smirk, had just stepped into a courtroom that would challenge everything he thought he knew about influence, privilege, and consequence. On May 2, 2024, at precisely 6:14 p.m., the city's din below Ryan Whitman's penthouse terrace on Park Avenue went unnoticed by him. Above, the sky reflected the last amber rays of spring as he and a small circle of friends prepped a drone, camera attached, promising spectacle and thrill. No permits had been filed, no safety inspection completed. "Trust me, it's all calculated," Ryan said, tossing a casual smirk toward his friends. But the illusion of control would shatter in seconds. Officer Elena Garcia, 29 of the NYPD, presented her testimony with clinical precision. "The drone descended 14 feet, 2 inches from the terrace edge," she said, voice steady. "It stopped 4 inches above Mr. Reyes' helmet as he navigated the loading zone. Property damage, $48,200. Potential bodily harm, catastrophic if the trajectory had shifted slightly." Her words painted a stark scene of chaos restrained by fortune rather than foresight. Neighbors recalled the panic in vivid detail. Mrs. Halpern, 68, who lived 2 floors below, described glass spraying across her apartment. "It sounded like a gunshot. I dove behind the counter and prayed," she said. Delivery driver Marcus Reyes, 34, recounted frozen seconds of terror as the drone clipped past him. "I thought it was over. I thought I'd be crushed for someone's thrill," he admitted, eyes still reflecting residual fear. Each recollection amplified the recklessness hidden beneath Ryan's carefree demeanor. As evidence rolled on, photos, repair estimates, digital logs of ignored safety protocols, the courtroom absorbed the enormity of negligence. Ryan, leaning back in his chair, attempted a joke about technical difficulties, eliciting a few stifled chuckles from his friends. Judge Caprio's gaze cut sharply through the room. "Levity will not mitigate responsibility," he said, voice calm but steel-edged. The laughter died instantly, replaced by an attentive hush that acknowledged the tension between privilege and peril. Ryan's confidence faltered, just enough for the courtroom to notice. The carefully curated persona, the assured smirk, the casual gestures, all contrasted sharply with the evidence laid bare. The incident was not a fluke. It was a manifestation of entitlement unchecked by consideration. Officer Garcia continued, detailing prior warnings about rooftop drone flights, ignored permits, and the hasty preparation that escalated the stunt from risky to near tragic. The delivery logs, timestamps, and neighborhood surveillance synced in chilling harmony. The drone's trajectory, measured in precise feet and inches, revealed the narrow margin by which disaster was avoided. "This was not luck," the prosecutor said. "This was a choice made by someone who assumed their status could override caution." The courtroom absorbed the weight of those words, the gallery's murmurs quieted into reflective tension. Ryan's father, Dr. Howard Whitman, sat rigidly, hands folded, face set in a controlled mask. His presence, usually a shield of prestige, offered no solace here. Judge Caprio's eyes met Ryan's, silently reinforcing that wealth could not absolve action from consequence. The young man's smirk reappeared for an instant, forced but now tinged with defensiveness rather than charm. He shifted in his seat, fingers brushing the armrest, aware of the growing moral scrutiny. Witnesses continued to relay their experiences, the terrified gasps, the scrambling for cover, the damage and shock. Each account layered the incident with emotional resonance. The courtroom was no longer just assessing legality. It was witnessing the human impact of arrogance, the ripple effects that extended beyond property damage into the lived reality of those endangered. Ryan's attempts to downplay the danger, to frame the moment as harmless fun, met an unyielding barrier of meticulous documentation and testimony. Silence followed each account, heavy and expectant. Reporter pens hovered mid-air, observers exchanged glances, and Ryan's circle of friends shifted uncomfortably, some avoiding eye contact, others biting lips. The narrative was clear. A privileged upbringing had not exempted him from the consequences of reckless actions. The evidence painted him as accountable not just for the stunt itself, but for the underlying attitude that permitted it, a disregard for safety and for those whose lives intersected with his indulgence. Judge Caprio finally spoke, voice calm yet unyielding. Responsibility is not inherited, it is exercised. Today we measure not potential, not intent, but impact, and the impact here is indisputable. The statement left a hush over the courtroom, emphasizing that accountability would not be negotiated or minimized. Ryan's glance toward his father carried a flicker of anxiety, an unspoken acknowledgement that his carefully constructed invincibility had met an immovable standard. The tension lingered as the courtroom transitioned from evidence to moral scrutiny. Ryan, who had entered with swagger, now shifted in his seat, the weight of human consequences pressing against the veil of entitlement. The incident had defined not just the case at hand, but the moral frame through which all further proceedings would be measured. In those quiet, charged moments, the foundation was laid for a confrontation between privilege and principle, setting the stage for the inevitable unraveling that awaited him. Ryan leaned back in his chair, fingers drumming lightly against the polished armrest, a smirk still attempting to cling to his face. With all due respect, Your Honor, are we sure this delivery driver's account is accurate? I mean, surely he exaggerated. I'd like to review the credibility of the witnesses. His tone was sharp, almost playful, as if testing the limits of both patience and procedure. The courtroom responded with a low murmur. A few spectators exchanged raised eyebrows, sensing the collision of entitlement with the immovable force of law. Judge Caprio, 63, did not flinch. His gaze, steady and unwavering, rested on Ryan with the quiet authority of someone who had seen this dance before. Young, privileged defendants testing the boundaries of decorum. In this courtroom, Mr. Whitman, he began slowly, each word measured, status, wealth, or familial prestige will not influence the truth of evidence or the enforcement of law. You are accountable for your actions, not your pedigree. The gallery stiffened. Even Ryan's legal aides sat straighter, pens pausing mid-scribble. Ryan chuckled lightly, attempting to diffuse tension with a wink toward his father, who sat a few rows back, expression carefully neutral. Just trying to ensure fairness, Ryan said, voice laced with sarcasm, though a slight crease appeared at his brow. His mother, seated beside Dr. Whitman, pressed her lips together, blinked rapidly and clasped her hands tightly, signaling rising anxiety as the courtroom's moral and social weight pressed upon them. Interruptions came quickly. Ryan questioned Officer Elena Garcia's testimony, pointing to minor timing discrepancies in her report. I mean, if the drone was measured at 14.2 feet, could it have realistically fallen as fast as you claim? He asked, voice sharp. Garcia met his gaze, calm, unwavering. Yes, Mr. Whitman, physics doesn't bend for privilege. The descent was verified through time-stamped surveillance, witness positioning, and drone telemetry. All independent. Her tone carried no malice, only precision, and the courtroom responded with a palpable tension, acknowledging the unassailable truth in her words. Ryan's smirk faltered slightly. He attempted to shift strategy, interrupting his own attorney mid-question. Isn't it true that the neighbor, Mrs. Halpern, lives in a particularly echo-prone apartment? Couldn't that have amplified the sound of the crash? His voice carried mock curiosity, as if layering sophistication over deflection. Judge Caprio's eyes narrowed imperceptibly. Mr. Whitman, you are attempting to manufacture doubt where none exists. The law evaluates facts, not the allure of clever distractions. A pause fell over the room. Ryan's friends fidgeted, his legal aides exchanged uneasy glances, and reporters leaned forward, sensing a critical crack in his performative confidence. The laughter he had relied upon as a shield during Chapter 2 was gone. Only a thin, strained tension remained. The courtroom had become a pressure chamber, testing not just legal arguments, but psychological composure. Ryan tried once more, this time addressing procedural rules. I request a review of the permit process. Surely a delay in municipal approval could shift liability? His voice carried the familiar entitlement of someone who had grown accustomed to influence and immediate compliance. Judge Caprio's response was deliberate, measured, and final. Procedural formalities do not absolve you of the fundamental responsibility to act safely. Your failure to secure authorization, to heed warnings, and to consider human consequences is clear, and it will be addressed accordingly. The subtle energy shifts in the courtroom were unmistakable. Staff whispered among themselves, noting the growing tension, while the gallery absorbed each exchange like a slow-burning revelation. Ryan's mother pressed her fingers against her lips. His father's jaw tightened, and even Ryan's posture shifted, leaning forward, hand tightening on his knee, as he registered that charm, sarcasm, and wit had no leverage here. Every exchange emphasized the fundamental theme. Privilege met its limits. Each sarcastic remark, each attempt to manipulate procedure or witness credibility, collided with an authority grounded not in wealth or reputation, but in justice and moral clarity. The courtroom became a crucible, burning away layers of entitlement and forcing an emotional reckoning even before legal penalties were discussed. By the chapter's end, the psychological duel had set the stage for the next phase. Ryan's laughter had been extinguished, replaced by unease and defensiveness. The audience, staff, witnesses, gallery members, and media recognized that the boy who had entered with arrogance was now contending with an immovable standard of accountability. The tension was not yet resolved, but the trajectory was clear. Influence could not overshadow responsibility, and the courtroom would be the stage upon which that truth would be revealed in full. The courtroom was hushed, the weight of anticipation pressing like the midday sun through tall windows. Evidence, meticulously gathered and immovable, lay before the participants like a moral ledger. Prosecutors began with video footage, each frame replaying the moment the drone plunged from the penthouse roof. A mechanical bird descending with reckless momentum. It crashed through the skylight, glass spraying like frozen rain, mere inches from the helmet of delivery driver Marcus Reyes. Each replay amplified the consequences of Ryan Whitman's arrogance, translating his privilege into tangible, almost cinematic danger. Officer Elena Garcia took the stand again, her presence precise and unflinching. The drone descended 14.2 feet in 3.6 seconds, she stated, voice calm but unwavering. It stopped 4 inches from Mr. Reyes's helmet. Any variance, any delay, could have resulted in serious injury or death. Her words were not abstract. They carried weight, a pulse of reality against Ryan's attempted levity. She detailed prior warnings issued to the Whitman penthouse regarding unauthorized drone flights, protocols ignored, and rush preparations that magnified risk. Every line dismantled the illusion that this was an isolated accident. Neighbors provided testimony, each voice punctuating the human stakes. Mrs. Halpern, 68, recounted her living room shattered by the skylight's destruction. I called out, terrified, she said. Glass everywhere. My cat ran, my heart racing. That boy's game could have killed someone. A single mother, Jessica Alvarez, echoed the chaos, her hands trembling as she described Marcus stumbling to safety, shards cutting his gloves. The courtroom absorbed their fear, the tangible tremors of lives interrupted by thoughtless privilege. Ryan attempted deflection, chuckling lightly and gesturing toward his friends. Technical difficulties, he quipped, as though the drone's plummet could be contained within a clever turn of phrase. Judge Caprio's gaze, sharp yet steady, silenced the room. Mr. Whitman, he said, voice deliberate, there is no humor in endangering the lives of others. Accountability cannot be clothed in wit. Ryan's defense team tried to frame the incident as a fleeting lapse, invoking drone certification, safety protocols, and even the family name, but meticulous records refused distortion. Engineering assessments confirmed structural vulnerabilities in the skylight. Timing analysis corroborated Officer Garcia's testimony, and insurance appraisals tallied damages at $48,200. Every data point pressed Ryan into a corner of truth he could not charm his way out of. The room became a ledger of negligence. Each number, each photo, each frame of video underscoring his recklessness. The gallery responded in silence punctuated by subtle gestures, breaths held, pens paused, jaws tight. Ryan's father shifted in his seat, pride wrestling with anxiety, understanding that prestige offered no immunity here. His mother's fingers tightened around the bench, small knuckles white, reflecting a family's internal reckoning. Ryan himself shifted, once cocky, now noticeably constrained. The weight of cumulative evidence pressed on his shoulders, a tactile reminder that law, logic, and human consequence were aligned against privilege. Every testimony, every replayed moment, constructed a narrative far beyond property damage. It revealed the psychological underpinnings of entitlement, a young man accustomed to influence, now confronted by the uncompromising metrics of reality. The moral gravity of negligence became undeniable, weaving through the technical data and human witness accounts, leaving no corner for sarcasm, charm, or diversion. As Officer Garcia concluded, the courtroom absorbed the full spectrum of accountability. The message was clear. Disregard for safety, regardless of lineage or wealth, carries real, often terrifying consequences. Ryan's posture tightened, eyes flicking toward the gallery, the weight of judgment sinking in. The court was no longer a backdrop for arrogance. It was a mirror reflecting the tangible human cost of privilege unchecked. By the chapter's end, the psychological stage was set for moral confrontation. Evidence had spoken in volumes Ryan could neither argue nor deflect. The auditorium of law, witness testimony, and irrefutable technical documentation merged into an unassailable statement. Recklessness is not abstract. It has faces, injuries, and shattered glass. The court awaited the next phase where human impact would collide directly with the man who had once laughed at the edges of responsibility, signaling the inexorable shift from arrogance to reckoning. Hands fidgeted in the gallery as Judge Caprio's gaze swept the room, steady and unyielding. Ryan Whitman sat rigid, shoulders squared, fingers tapping lightly on the polished wood, his smirk now a thin veneer stretched over unease. The court had absorbed the evidence of the drone incident, yet what was about to unfold pierced beyond mere property damage. The revelation of how privilege had been used and abused to evade accountability. Detective Marcus Lane, who had been quietly observing, took the stand. During the investigation, he began, voice measured, we discovered multiple attempts to influence outcomes behind the scenes. There were calls to city officials, messages suggesting leniency, and subtle pressure on officers to minimize charges. Witnesses were encouraged to soften statements, to downplay the severity. He paused, letting the weight of the revelation settle. The room was silent, the only sounds the faint scratch of pens and the slow, deliberate breathing of those present. Ryan's eyes darted to his father, then to his mother, then back to the judge. His fingers, once confident, now twitched against the table. That's not, he began, his voice faltering, the first cracks in his armor audible. Judge Caprio's voice cut through, calm yet absolute. Mr. Whitman, attempts to manipulate the system do not mitigate your actions. They amplify the responsibility you bear. Influence and wealth cannot alter the truth, nor the harm caused. The gallery reacted subtly. Reporters leaned forward, pens moving quickly. Neighbors exchanged glances, murmurs of disbelief barely contained. Ryan's mother placed a hand over her mouth, eyes wide, as if witnessing a slow-motion collapse of the carefully curated image of her son. His father remained still, jaw tight, a mixture of anger and resignation settling across his features. Detective Lane continued, detailing calls made to NYPD officers on May 3rd and 4, suggesting that charges might be downgraded if statements were clarified in a more favorable light. I have records, Lane said, producing printed logs, text messages, voicemail transcripts, emails, all attempts to sway the investigation. None of these will be ignored. Each document seemed to land like a hammer, evidence of moral as well as legal transgression. Ryan shifted in his seat, pale now, hands clenching and unclenching. I didn't think anyone would get hurt that badly, he muttered, a line intended to explain but failing to excuse. Judge Caprio's gaze, unwavering, met his. You did not think, the judge said slowly, and yet others suffered because of what you thoughtlessly allowed. Negligence is compounded by attempts to escape accountability. A murmur rippled through the gallery as Ryan's composure faltered further. He looked down, eyes refusing contact, shoulders stiffening under the moral gravity closing in. Every subtle gesture, fingers tapping nervously, a trembling lip, diverted gaze, spoke louder than his words. Reporters scribbled the nuances, capturing the subtle fall of privilege under scrutiny. The courtroom itself seemed to breathe with attention. Justice, impartial and deliberate, pressed against the fraying edge of entitlement. Each revelation, the calls, the messages, the subtle pressure on witnesses, exposed not just negligence, but a pattern of entitlement. A young man accustomed to deference, now confronted with the limits of wealth and influence. Judge Caprio's voice sliced through the mounting tension. Privilege is a tool, Mr. Whitman, not a shield. In this court, you answer not to your reputation, but to the consequences of your actions. Ryan swallowed, his throat tight, the words landing like stones. His mind raced, calculating, grasping for some deflection, but none existed. Every document, every testimony, every witness had formed a net from which there was no escape. The gallery watched, silently enthralled, as a man once confident became visibly smaller. The moral force of exposure eclipsed the legal technicalities, demonstrating that attempts to manipulate justice cannot withstand the light of scrutiny. Ryan's eyes, once bright with entitlement, now reflected a dawning recognition. Status could not absolve responsibility. By the chapter's end, the courtroom had shifted. What had begun as a display of inherited confidence had become a study in accountability. Privilege, when wielded to circumvent consequence, had been laid bare. And as Ryan sat, tense and subdued, the moral weight of his actions and of his attempts to evade them hung in the air, setting the stage for the human confrontation yet to come, where victims would force him to confront the tangible cost of recklessness and entitlement. Marcus Reyes shifted on the witness stand, fingers curling around the edge as if holding himself together. He was 34, lean, with calloused hands from years of deliveries, a man accustomed to unpredictability, but nothing had prepared him for the chaos of that May evening. "I thought this was it," he said quietly, voice steady but tight with memory. "I thought I'd be crushed for someone's thrill." The words hung in the air, slicing through the residual arrogance that had lingered like a fog around Ryan Whitman. The gallery went still. Even the stenographer paused, pen hovering above the page. Ryan's gaze flicked toward Marcus, a nervous twitch in his jaw betraying the facade of confidence. He had seen the numbers, the footage, the technical reports. He had even joked lightly in the gallery earlier, attempting to diffuse tension with humor. But now, hearing the fear, the raw, human terror he had caused, was an entirely different weight. Mrs. Halpern, 68, followed. Her hands were wrinkled, yet her grip on her notes was firm, deliberate. Her apartment had been the site of shattered glass and violated safety. Her voice wavered only slightly. "My skylight is ruined. My home felt unsafe. I called the city, I called your father's office, and I just wanted someone to be responsible." She looked directly at Ryan, her eyes unflinching. "And you were supposed to be that someone." Ryan's shoulders slumped imperceptibly. The smirk that had once played across his face was gone, replaced by a flush of confusion and guilt. He blinked rapidly, trying to process the human faces behind the numbers he had abstracted so easily in. Reports and defenses, the legal arguments, the technicalities of drone weight, fall distance, and reaction time, all reduced to the tremor in Marcus's voice and the quiet firmness in Mrs. Halpern's stare. Judge Caprio's voice broke the silence, calm but insistent. "Mr. Whitman, these individuals are here not to debate your calculations, but to share the consequences of your actions. Listen." Ryan's throat tightened, and for the first time he did. He didn't speak, didn't gesture, only absorbed. Marcus continued, recounting the minutes as if replaying a film etched into memory. "The glass fell like rain around me. I ducked instinctively, helmet to the side. I thought I'd never see my family again that night." He swallowed, taking a shaky breath. "I didn't do anything wrong, but I almost... His words broke, and the emptiness of near tragedy filled the courtroom. Mrs. Halpern spoke next, recounting the disruption to her life, the stress, and the cost. Not just financial, though the estimate of $4,200 for repairs loomed large, but the erosion of her sense of security. I could hear the drone buzzing, the glass cracking. It's something you never forget. My home was supposed to be my sanctuary, and it wasn't. Ryan's hands pressed together under the table. His mouth opened, closed, and finally words emerged in a shaky whisper. I, I didn't realize, I didn't think anyone would get hurt like that. The statement was an admission of negligence, but not yet moral reckoning. His eyes darted toward his father in the gallery, as if seeking approval, a shield, some invisible buffer against the weight of lived consequence. But his father remained stoic, jaw tight, silent. Judge Caprio's eyes met Ryan's, unyielding. You are hearing the truth now. Legal culpability is one thing, but moral responsibility requires acknowledgement, reflection, and restitution. Do you understand? Ryan swallowed hard. His nod was small but deliberate, a gesture that marked the first tangible shift from arrogance to accountability. He took a breath, voice still wavering, and addressed Marcus and Mrs. Halpern directly. I, I am so sorry. I never meant to put anyone in danger. I want to make this right. I will cover damages, support safety programs, and, if you allow me, personally contribute to initiatives that prevent something like this from happening again. His eyes met theirs, pleading for acknowledgement of sincerity, though the courtroom waited silently to judge authenticity. The room remained hushed. The victim's expression softened slightly, not fully forgiving, but recognizing the break in Ryan's armor, the first evidence that accountability was moving from abstract numbers into the tangible realm of conscience. The confrontation had done what legal documents could not. It had transformed distant, theoretical responsibility into lived, human understanding. Judge Caprio nodded once, sharply letting the moment settle. Mr. Whitman, this is where restitution begins. Your words are only the start. Your actions must follow. The court will oversee the steps required to repair both harm and trust. Ryan exhaled slowly, the tension in his shoulders easing minutely. He had felt the full weight of human consequence. The courtroom had shifted from a theater of privilege to a chamber of moral reckoning. What remained was action, consistent and deliberate, to match the words now hovering over the gallery like an inescapable responsibility. The chapter closed with a quiet anticipation. The audience, Ryan included, understood that the verdict to come would extend beyond fines or procedural reprimands. True accountability demanded engagement, reflection, and the difficult path of sustained restitution, bridging the gap between entitlement and ethical responsibility. June 21st of 2024, 10:17 a.m. The courtroom was hushed, an almost sacred silence stretching across the polished wood and rows of observers. Ryan Whitman sat rigid, blazer still impeccable, hands folded tightly in his lap. The air smelled faintly of coffee and anticipation, the kind of tense expectancy that makes every exhale feel audible. Judge Caprio, 63, adjusted his glasses and looked across the room with calm authority. Mr. Whitman, he began, voice deliberate, this court has reviewed the evidence, the testimonies, and the repercussions of your actions. You have heard directly from those harmed. The question now is not only legal liability, but moral responsibility. Ryan shifted, a flicker of nervousness crossing his face. For the first time, the smirk that had carried him through previous hearings was absent. He swallowed, aware of the weight pressing down, an authority that could not be charmed, outmaneuvered, or bought. The incident on May the 2nd, 2024, at your family's penthouse, Judge Caprio continued, was not a harmless prank. It endangered lives. It damaged property worth $48,200. Beyond the physical consequences, it eroded trust and sense of safety in your community. You attempted to leverage privilege, to skirt responsibility, and to minimize human impact. That will not stand. Ryan's father shifted uneasily in his seat. Ryan glanced at him, seeking reassurance, but found none. The gallery, neighbors, witnesses, legal staff, and journalists leaned forward collectively, a shared awareness that the courtroom was about to render a sentence that extended beyond mere dollars. Judge Caprio's gaze sharpened. Punitive measures alone would fail to capture the scope of this misconduct. Therefore, the court imposes a combination of penalties designed to restore balance and emphasize moral accountability. He paused, letting the words sink in. You are ordered to pay $175,000 in fines and restitution. You will attend community safety and responsibility workshops over 6 months, and you will submit to quarterly compliance monitoring to ensure sustained engagement. Ryan exhaled audibly, the first crack in his posture visible. His fingers tightened, jaw working as if chewing on the enormity of the consequences. This was more than money. It was a roadmap of obligation, a structured path through which he would confront the human effects of entitlement. Further, Judge Caprio said, you will engage directly with those affected. You will personally lead youth safety initiatives, mentor at-risk children, and implement educational programs addressing the consequences of reckless actions. These measures are not optional. They are essential to demonstrating genuine accountability, to bridging the chasm between privilege and responsibility. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Ryan's mother pressed her palms together, whispering something inaudible. Ryan's eyes lowered, catching the ledger of workshop schedules and restitution plans. Realizing that the court's expectation was not performative, this was sustained, tangible engagement. The judge's voice softened slightly but did not lose its gravity. Mr. Whitman, the intention is not to humiliate, but to educate and repair. The true measure of justice is not only in fines or procedural reprimands, but in actions taken to restore trust, to prevent harm, and to internalize responsibility. You have the opportunity to transform privilege into service, recklessness into learning, arrogance into empathy. Ryan swallowed, a lump in his throat. Yes, Your Honor, he said quietly, almost a whisper. The gallery caught the sincerity in the tone, the recognition that legal and moral imperatives had converged. Judge Caprio leaned back slightly. This court will follow the progress of these initiatives. Compliance will be documented. Your engagement must be consistent, demonstrable, and reflective. Only through sustained effort will restitution extend beyond the financial to the ethical and social dimensions of responsibility. The sentence delivered more than consequence. It articulated a philosophy. It demanded that the offender confront the ripple effects of privilege, that restitution involve human connection, and that moral growth become measurable through consistent, visible action. Ryan absorbed the full weight, cheeks flushed, hands slightly trembling. He had heard the human voices, faced the evidence, and now stood before a roadmap to redemption that was both inescapable and instructive. The courtroom remained silent, the air charged with reflection. Journalists scribbled, witnesses exhaled softly, and Ryan exhaled with a mix of relief and apprehension. Shock and humiliation, yes, but intertwined with a nascent understanding that privilege could no longer shield him from accountability. As Judge Caprio concluded, "May your actions reflect the lessons learned here today." The courtroom seemed to collectively inhale, recognizing the gravity of justice that combined legal precision with ethical reckoning. Ryan's journey was no longer hypothetical. It had begun. And in that moment, every observer understood. The verdict was not merely a sentence. It was a statement that wealth does not circumvent consequence, that accountability requires action, and that redemption demands engagement. June 22, 2024, 6:15 a.m. Rain pelted Park Avenue, turning the city streets into a muted blur of gray, reflective asphalt and hurried umbrellas. Ryan Whitman pulled his collar tight, the tailored blazer soaked, hair plastered to his forehead. The luxury and comfort of his penthouse and family car were gone, replaced by a folding chair at a community center, a stack of safety flyers, and the faint scent of damp concrete. For the first time, accountability was physical, real, and unavoidable. The youth workshop began with 10 curious kids, ages 10 to 14, eyes wide, some skeptical, others openly hostile. Ryan cleared his throat, feeling the weight of every glance. "Good morning," he said, voice firmer than he expected. "Today, we're going to learn about safety, about responsibility, about actions and consequences." He could feel the echo of Judge Caprio's words in his mind, the reminder that this was not performative, not for cameras, not for applause. Marcus Reyes, the delivery driver whose helmet had narrowly been struck, had agreed to speak. He began carefully, detailing what it felt like to be at the wrong place at the wrong time. The fear of injury, the realization that someone's recklessness could have ended him. Ryan watched as the children leaned forward, absorbing the gravity. He remembered his own arrogance, the laughter, the casual dismissal of danger. A flush of guilt traveled from his chest to his throat, tightening his voice. Over the weeks, Ryan's days began before dawn. Each workshop, each safety demonstration, was punctuated by fatigue, rain-soaked papers, and the impatient energy of children unaccustomed to lectures on risk. Parents observed silently from doorways, initially mistrustful, some shaking their heads, others whispering comments about entitlement. Ryan felt their judgment acutely, internalizing each glance, each sigh. He oversaw drone simulations now, emphasizing careful navigation, proper height, and situational awareness. "If you fly recklessly, you could hurt someone," he said repeatedly, this time not as a joke, but as a moral imperative. He corrected mistakes gently but firmly, showing that safety was non-negotiable. Each repeated instruction, each hour-long demonstration, reminded him of his failure and the human cost of arrogance. The transformation was slow. At first, the children rolled their eyes or murmured behind his back. A few refused to engage. But as days became weeks, they noticed consistency. Ryan arrived on time, never left early, answered questions honestly, and admitted past mistakes without deflection. Slowly, respect replaced skepticism. One afternoon, a 12-year-old boy asked, "So, you really did break someone's skylight?" Ryan nodded, the memory sharp and uncomfortable. "Yes," he said, "and I learned the hard way why safety matters." The boy smiled faintly, a tentative bridge of trust forming. Community members began to notice subtle changes. Parents who had once whispered complaints now nodded approvingly. Educators observed his patience, his willingness to repeat instructions, to correct without condescension, to listen to the children's fears and questions. Every cold morning, every rain-soaked demonstration, every explanation grounded in accountability chipped away at the arrogance that had defined him. Ryan also maintained detailed logs as mandated by Judge Caprio. Each report noted hours, topics covered, challenges faced, and reflections on personal growth. Initially, the act of writing felt bureaucratic, tedious, but it became a mirror. Each word confronted his prior negligence. Each entry documented the transformation, not in appearance, but in conscience. By the third month, the workshops expanded to include parents and community volunteers. Ryan facilitated group discussions, acknowledging the full impact of his actions, inviting questions, listening without defensiveness. The initial hostility softened. Curiosity replaced skepticism, and tentative trust began to form. His voice, once sharp with sarcasm, now carried a tone of authority tempered by empathy. 6 months in, Ryan's demeanor had shifted profoundly. He smiled less as a shield, more as an acknowledgement of shared understanding. His clothing, still neat, was practical rather than flashy. His conversations demonstrated awareness, a recognition of responsibility, and a commitment to prevent future harm. Privilege had not vanished, but its expression had transformed from entitlement to service. Each child who laughed safely during a demonstration, each parent who nodded in approval, each volunteer who noted his dedication, marked incremental victories. Redemption, Ryan realized, was not a statement of words or a courtroom declaration. It was earned in repetition, in sweat, in the quiet accumulation of consistent action. By the end of the 6th month, Ryan stood before a workshop of children, parents, and educators alike. He addressed them directly. "I cannot undo the harm I caused, but I can show that mistakes, even serious ones, can become lessons. Responsibility is not easy, but it is necessary. I hope my example helps you understand that." Eyes met his, nods acknowledged sincerity, and for the first time, he felt a connection unmediated by status or privilege. The journey of accountability had begun in a courtroom, but it had been cemented in the streets, classrooms, and living rooms of a community he had once taken for granted. Redemption was no longer theoretical. It was tangible, witnessed, and shared. The story was far from over, but the foundation had been laid, and trust slowly was being rebuilt. June 30th, 2024, 10:12 a.m. The city streets of Manhattan buzzed with a normal weekday rhythm, yet the story of Ryan Whitman lingered in coffee shops, school hallways, and newsstands. The headlines no longer screamed scandal. They highlighted lessons learned, accountability earned, and the ripple effects of one high-profile case transforming into a civic example. Families in the Upper East Side recounted the near miss of May the 2nd as a cautionary tale, now paired with Ryan's months of tangible restitution. Law students in ethics classes pored over court transcripts, video footage, and community reports, analyzing the arc from entitlement to engagement, and journalists archived the journey as a model of moral clarity. Parents approached Ryan quietly during a community event at the public library. One mother, her arms crossed, eyes wary, said, "We didn't believe at first, but you've shown up, in rain, cold, every single week. That matters." He nodded, silently acknowledging the weight of each glance, each whispered judgment, and every moment of skepticism overcome. The children who had once rolled their eyes during workshops now waved eagerly, calling out safety tips he had drilled into them, repeating lessons he hadn't just taught, but lived. At Marcus Reyes's apartment on 45th Street, he recounted the story of that evening to friends over coffee. "I thought I'd never feel safe around a drone again," he admitted, "but watching him teach, seeing him explain every precaution, it's strange, but I trust it now." He changed, really. Mrs. Halpern, his octogenarian neighbor, whose skylight had borne the brunt of Ryan's recklessness, added, "It's not about the money or the courtroom. It's about seeing him care. That matters more than restitution." Meanwhile, schools across Manhattan implemented enhanced safety protocols. Drones and rooftop access policies were updated, liability signage increased, and educational programs incorporated lessons from Ryan's experience. Children practiced safe handling, adults monitored with newfound awareness, and the story of one near accident became an institutionalized guide for responsible behavior. Educators praised the case as a teaching moment that combined legal consequence with moral reflection. Local media framed the narrative with a balance of scrutiny and acknowledgement. Reports highlighted Ryan's evolution from entitled youth to a responsible community figure, emphasizing the value of accountability over punishment alone. A journalist covering the 6-month workshops noted, "This isn't a redemption story written for cameras. It's a community observing change, tangible and consistent. That's what sets it apart." Social media discussions mirrored public discourse, shifting from outrage to curiosity, skepticism to cautious respect. Ryan's presence at city forums and neighborhood gatherings became symbolic. He spoke without ego, often letting community members lead discussions. At a civic meeting on public safety held on July 15, 2024, he addressed the room. "Privilege can make mistakes invisible, but accountability makes them visible. What I did affected real people. Every step since has been about making amends and showing that responsibility is not optional." The audience responded with measured applause, understanding that his sincerity was measured by months of action rather than one-time statements. Law and ethics professors cited the case in lectures. Students debated not only the legal ramifications, but also the ethical dimensions, how wealth and influence intersect with public responsibility, and how moral courage can be exercised under scrutiny. One professor remarked, "This case exemplifies the power of corrective action. Justice isn't just a verdict, it's the sustained effort to repair harm, socially and personally." For students, the story of Ryan Whitman became a case study in real-world ethics, bridging theory and practice. By late July, Ryan's engagement had woven into the fabric of the community. Volunteers, children, parents, and educators referenced his workshops and conversations, using them as examples for safety and responsibility in daily life. Ryan no longer needed to assert authority. His consistent behavior spoke louder than words, demonstrating that accountability, when practiced diligently, inspires trust. The transformation also prompted reflection across the city. Discussions emerged about the nature of privilege, how it can shield missteps, but how deliberate, sustained action can convert influence into service. Neighborhoods embraced the lesson that justice extends beyond courtrooms. It flourishes when society witnesses genuine effort, moral recognition, and the repair of tangible harm. As summer edged into fall, Ryan's story was no longer defined by a drone crash or courtroom tension, but by the impact he left on the community, the lives he touched, and the social dialogue he inspired. The tale closed with a collective understanding. Justice is measured not only in verdicts or fines, but in ethical consciousness raised, trust rebuilt, and the enduring capacity of one individual to transform privilege into responsibility. In the end, the city's reflection mirrored the moral arc of the case. True accountability resonates long after the courtroom empties, leaving lessons that shape both individuals and the community. October 10th, 2024, 7:45 a.m. A light drizzle coated the sidewalks of Manhattan, reflecting the early autumn sun in glimmering streaks. Ryan Whitman stepped out of a modest sedan, unaccompanied by lawyers, assistants, or cameras, the echoes of the past 6 months behind him. Gone was the smirk that once defined him, replaced by a quiet attentiveness as he approached the community center for a morning safety workshop. This wasn't a photo op, a headline, or a PR moment. It was consistency, accountability distilled into action, a daily commitment that spoke louder than any courtroom verdict ever could. Parents greeted him cautiously, some with lingering skepticism, others with tentative smiles. Children who once eyed him with curiosity now approached with trust, repeating safety protocols he had instilled through patient instruction. He listened more than he spoke, asking questions, clarifying misunderstandings, and ensuring that every demonstration reinforced responsibility. Marcus Reyes, the delivery driver who had narrowly escaped injury months prior, watched from the back, noting the genuine care in Ryan's explanations, the meticulous attention to detail. Mrs. Halpern, now comfortably seated in her renovated living room with a clear view of the skyline, recounted to neighbors, "I never thought I'd see it, but he's different. He actually cares. That's the rarest thing in this city." At a civic forum later that morning, discussion turned towards systemic responsibility. Educators, parents, and community leaders debated drone safety, rooftop hazards, and youth engagement. Ryan took no podium, yet when called upon, he addressed the group with humility. Privilege doesn't excuse action, it magnifies consequences. The only way forward is to repair the harm and ensure it doesn't repeat. "I've made mistakes. I'm accountable, and I'm here to demonstrate that accountability is ongoing, not a one-time gesture." His words resonated because they weren't abstract. They were informed by months of early mornings, long hours in the rain, and hands-on guidance. Schools continued to integrate the lessons from Ryan's journey. Teachers reported improved engagement, children exhibited heightened awareness of safety, and parents felt validated by tangible improvements. Discussions in classrooms extended beyond technical safety. They included ethics, responsibility, and the impact of unchecked privilege. Students, inspired by the real-life consequences and subsequent redemption arc, debated what moral courage looked like in everyday choices. Law students continued to study the case as a model of ethical reflection paired with legal accountability. The media, once focused on scandal, now chronicled transformation. Features highlighted the sustained nature of Ryan's efforts, the late mornings, rigorous workshops, and mentorship that lacked fanfare, but produced meaningful change. Journalists described the arc from entitled youth to accountable community participant as a rare example of ongoing redemption, emphasizing that ethical growth cannot be faked or rushed. Social media, too, reflected this shift. Discussions evolved from outrage and mockery to curiosity, cautious admiration, and recognition of genuine change. Even Ryan's father, Dr. Howard Whitman, recognized the shift. At a neighborhood meeting in mid-October, he observed quietly from the back, noting how his son's dedication, once driven perhaps by expectation, had evolved into intrinsic accountability. Marcus Reyes approached Ryan. Afterward, handshake firm, eyes steady. "I've seen the difference," he said simply. "This isn't just about court orders. You've changed how people trust, not just in you, but in safety, in responsibility." Ryan nodded, words unnecessary. The acknowledgement itself affirmed the moral arc of his journey. Neighborhoods reflected on the broader implications. Conversations extended into civic programs and parent associations, what it means to wield privilege responsibly, how accountability can ripple through communities, and the moral imperative of consistent action. This reflection transcended one individual's story, embedding lessons about public trust, ethical stewardship, and civic duty into the very fabric of local consciousness. Months later, Ryan continued quietly. No cameras followed him as he supervised workshops, explained risk mitigation to teenagers, or guided discussions on ethical responsibility. The delivery driver and neighbors could see the difference firsthand. Change measured not by gestures, but by consistency, humility, and real engagement. The city absorbed the narrative as both cautionary tale and model of transformation, a reminder that true accountability is iterative, visible in deeds rather than declarations, and sustained by daily choices rather than fleeting spectacle. As the seasons shifted toward winter, reflection deepened. Civic leaders, educators, and community members recognized a truth often overlooked. Justice is not only about verdicts, fines, or punitive measures. It thrives when lessons resonate socially, morally, and personally, when privilege is leveraged responsibly, and when individuals confront their missteps with persistent effort. Ryan Whitman's story closed not with applause or accolades, but with an enduring moral imprint, one of responsibility assumed, trust rebuilt, and ethical awareness that stretches far beyond the courtroom walls. It left the city pondering the delicate balance between influence, consequence, and human accountability, and offered a final, reflective truth. Transformation is only authentic when it survives scrutiny, repetition, and the passage of time.